given the givens of this year and what's been going on with my health and really having no choice because of my inability to knit, I promised myself that I wouldn't even think about gift knitting this year for the holiday season. And I was pretty good at keeping that promise to myself until I started to feel stronger again and until my fingers really started to itch for knitting again in about October. And then my promise to myself didn't last very long. But it didn't last very long for a very good reason, because as much as I have had a big year with lots of changes, a very good friend of mine, a friend that I've known and loved for more than 20 years, has also had a quite eventful year in their life, in the form of a young person coming to live with them. And when I first learned this news, I asked what this young person's favorite colors were, as you do if you are the kind of knitter who likes to show love for people by knitting for them. And this young person loves kind of greens and browns and mossy colors, and I love knitting with those colors, so I immediately started thinking about projects that I could knit for them. Now, when I'm thinking gift knit for someone who lives in a cold climate, or a climate that, at least at certain times of year, becomes quite cold, I think first and foremost of hats. Everybody needs one, it never hurts to have another, and hats are always good to have around to shove in different bags, in the sleeves of different coats, just to make sure, in your car, just to make sure that you've always got them handy. But of course, if I'm going to knit one hat and send it across the ocean and then across the continent of North America to Vancouver, really I might as well knit 3 hats and give my friend their partner and this young person who I have yet to meet each a hat of their own, or hats that they can share. I haven't really decided which hat is going to be for which person. I'll let them sort that out. In my experience though, the hats that are the most fun to knit are not always the easiest to wear and are not always the biggest hit with my giftees for that reason, I think. The friend in question, the friend and their partner, who's really a friend as well, I've known them so long, and this new young adult in their lives, all have quite a distinct, clean, bold style that I think would be best suited by a quite understated hat in a good, solid color. So I decided to go to a tried and tested pattern for me, which I guess is really more of a formula than a pattern, and knit 3 1x1 rib hats. I didn't have any green yarn that I thought was really gonna fit the bill for kind of mossy greens and browns. So I sourced some beautiful green yarn, 100% Swedish wool yarn from the company Jarbo online. And for the other 2 yarns I decided to source from Stash. So the brown yarn, the thinnest of the 3 yarns, is some leftover West Yorkshire Spinners Jacob fleece. So 100% British wool, 100% from Jacob sheep, which is quite fun because then I can direct my friends to look up those Jacob sheep with their incredible horns. And finally, the thickest of the 3 yarns, the kind of light grey, is the color Sheep's Grey from Briggs and Little. There's the color. From Canada's oldest woolen mill. In knitting circles, we often encounter this idea of knitting our intentions or well wishes or love into our knits, especially if they're knits that are destined for someone in our lives, if they're a gift knit or if they're going to be mailed, as mine will be, over long distances. This is an idea I really love. I think it pops up when we talk about prayer shawls, but really anytime we're talking about knitting with a specific goal, knitting with a specific intention or emotion in mind, that gets knitted into the project. This isn't always positive, of course. I've talked before about knits that I've worked on in periods of difficulty or ill health, kind of taking on some of that emotion for me. But in terms of gift knits, I think that this is such a wonderful, kind of joyful idea where the process really becomes part of the product, the object that you ultimately give to someone. It's not just, in my case, a series of hats that I'm hoping to gift. It's also all the time that I spent working on them, thinking about my friends, and really wishing that I could be with them. And as with most things in my life, as I really fall in love with the idea and sink my teeth into it and get thinking about it more, I go looking for resonances in the writers and pieces of writing around me that I use to help kind of interpret the world. In this case, for me, that's Emily Dickinson, a poet who really, I think, is one of the great geniuses of her century. Dickinson does have poems that deal more explicitly with knitting, but as I was working on these hats and thinking about what I wanted them to mean, it was a poem about time and distance and long-distance friendship or love that kept resurfacing for me. Long years apart can make no breach, a second cannot fill. The absence of the witch does not invalidate the spell. The embers of 1,000 years uncovered by the hand that fondled them when they were fire will stir and understand. I love this poem. I love the symbols. I think it's deceptively simple. I love the mixture of this kind of quotidian experience, something that many of us will recognize, long years apart, and juxtaposes it or mixes it all together with this much more mythic and mysterious embers of 1,000 years. Come on. Most of all, though, I love that the poem hinges on possibility and on handwork. A second can fill long years apart, but it will not necessarily do so on its own. Similarly, it takes a physical hand, fondling and stirring those embers to renew the fire of friendship and acquaintance and love and felicity. It's a fire, a closeness that works alongside the witch's spell. Not just words, not just actions, but both together. It's no great leap to go from witch to knitter or spinner or weaver or to any other one of those innumerable handicrafts that have historically been relegated to the category of the less important, less financially valuable category of the female arts. And Dickinson herself would no doubt have been aware of this, though she might have thought about these categories in slightly different ways. She was herself an avid baker. And I think that this poem, taken as a whole, summarizes my own intentions well, to cast a spell while I'm knitting, with my knitting, to breach that long-distance divide. Plus, the hats will hopefully keep their recipients warm, just like a fire keeps people warm, which seems like a nice bonus resonance to me. I've been talking about Emily Dickinson's friendship, her poems about friendship. I'm going to talk more a bit about her letters about friendship, her letters to friends. And I've been applying this to my own lifelong platonic relationship with my friend. And I think that this is a perfectly legitimate way to read these poems, a perfectly legitimate way to interpret them through our own lives. But since we're touching on the topic of Dickinson and friendship, I also feel like it's important to note that friendship was often used as a cloak, or Dickinson often used friendship as a cloak in her own life to conceal what was, in a kind of central way, a much less platonic relationship in her life, a romantic relationship, an intellectual relationship, a lifelong friendship that was so much more than friendship that she had with her dear friend and sister-in-law, Susan Gilbert Dickinson. Unfortunately, because of this kind of outward readability of platonic female friendship, this relationship has often been read by critics and literary historians and historians of the 19th century as purely platonic. But it wasn't, and that kind of overlooking of what else was going on is a way to kind of couch the fact that Dickinson was fairly clearly a queer woman. We can't know exactly how she would identify in our terms if she were here today, but we can certainly see that she was not what the world and literary history wanted her to be for quite a long time. And we should definitely be seeing that possibility in her poems about friendship, even though those specific contexts, of course, won't always apply, and it's impossible for us to know when they apply and when they don't, but I think it's important to be aware of them. Keeping all of that in mind, I do, though, in this video, want to focus on Dickinson's platonic friendships, because though she was famously reclusive, especially in later life, she had many friendships, and they were clearly highly valued. Often she, exchanged letters over long periods of time, sent handcrafted poems, sometimes composed spontaneously for the person they were being sent to, and she'd often include thoughtful little gifts, or trinkets, she called them, along with these poems. Often these were plants taken from her garden or conservatory, including roses, jasmine, pine needles, oak leaves. In a letter to Mabel Loomis Todd, who would eventually become one of the kind of two people charged with sending her poems out to the world in ways that editors and critics today, myself included, I have to say, find very controversial because of some of the editorial choices that they made. But she and Dickinson did have a relationship while she was alive, and Dickinson once sent her a cricket, a dried cricket. She sent her nephew, Gib, a dead bee, along with one of his letters. And Catherine Scott Turner got a pair of knitted garters. The gift of the knitted garters is a particularly fascinating one, I think, and not just for those of us who are interested in historical knitwear generally. It's a particularly fascinating example of Emily Dickinson's gift-giving, I think, because it came with a poem that not only accompanied it, but further illuminates the relationship between the two women and the kind of place of the garters in this relationship. All of this may be revealing the knitted garters to be not such a great example of a gift within a platonic friendship in Emily Dickinson's life, after all. When Katie walks, the simple pair accompany her side. When Katie runs unwearied, they follow on the road. When Katie kneels, their loving hands still clasp her pious knee. Ah, Katie, smile at fortune, with two so knit to thee. I wasn't able to find much more information about Emily Dickinson's knitted garters, or indeed about her knitting more generally. In Autumn Overlooked My Knitting, Autumn takes on the voice of an interlocutor, a kind of looming ending or a seasonal dusk, with whom Dickinson ostensibly discusses dyes and colors. We also have brief references to knitting in letters Dickinson wrote to friends, like one she wrote to Louise Norcross in around 1865. She wrote this letter following yet another period of severe ill health, this time specifically involving her eyes, and in it she expresses the kind of sentiment that I'm sure many of us who struggle with chronic illness will be able to sympathize with. She writes, "I then make the yellow to the pies, and bang the spices for the cake, and knit the soles to the stockings I knit the bodies to last June." It's a timeline she seems dissatisfied with, as with her other activities, as she goes on to say, "They say I am a help, partly because it is true, I suppose, and the rest applause." But, in general, unfortunately, Emily Dickinson's knitting, like much of the work that was done primarily by women throughout history, is lost to the time in which it was made. Thankfully, knitted garters were common enough in the 19th century, and this pattern for a new style of garter from Godey's Lady's Book magazine of 1862 gives us an idea of what Dickinson's knit garters might have looked like. Stitched by the same hands that spelled out her poems, and perhaps with the same intentions, dedication, and genius. In a 2011 article in the Emily Dickinson Journal, Daniel Meinhem posits that Dickinson must have been influenced by transcendentalism and the transcendentalist writers' ideas of what gift-giving is and should be. In Gifts, an essay from 1844, Ralph Waldo Emerson articulates his ideas on this topic directly. "The only gift is a portion of thyself," he writes. Therefore, the poet brings his poem, the shepherd his lamb. Shortly thereafter, Emerson is also careful to articulate what does not make a good gift. "But it is a cold, lifeless business when you go to the shops to buy me something which does not represent your life and talent, but a goldsmith's." I agree with Mannheim, but I also suspect that Dickinson was individual enough and original enough that she would have entered into this kind of gift-giving, the kind of gift-giving that suited her and her sensibilities, whether she'd read Emerson's essay or not. It's not every aunt, after all, who sends you a dead bee along with your letter, or who becomes famous with the local children for lowering baskets of baked goods from her window. Dickinson's talents were as wide-ranging and individual as they were astounding. She clearly understood the value of something made by hand, or selected with care. I didn't quite manage to finish my hats in time to get them mailed before the holidays. But missing that deadline and knowing that I was going to miss that deadline actually took some of the pressure off, and I was able to finish the hats, taking good breaks and not pushing my hands too far. So as the holidays rolled by, and even a little after, I took my time putting together a package for my friends, including details about the 3 different yarns I used and little related facts that I thought they might get a kick out of. When I originally planned this video, I intended to end it with a kind of hope that my friends would A, receive the hats, that they would make it, and B, that they would enjoy the hats. But more than that even, that they would understand what I was trying to convey with the hats, that they would feel all the love and time and thought I'd poured into them and tried to send across the ocean and across the continent of North America. Filming and editing this video didn't exactly go to plan either, however, and I had time not only to hope that my friends would receive and appreciate the hats, but to know that the hats were received and to receive myself the kind of note that I think anyone who knits and gives gifts would just love to receive. An outpouring of love and delight and enthusiasm and surprise, accompanied by a photo of my 3 friends, hat-clad and absolutely beaming. Now, if I was a really good YouTuber, I would have a fantastic little montage of the finished hats in daylight, maybe worn on my head so you could see how they fit, to share with you. But I have to admit that though I managed not to crash after the holidays until the final hat was finished and bound off, once that happened, I did crash pretty hard. And I held on to the hats for a full 2 weeks on my end, waiting to be well enough to take a bit of footage in daylight. But finally I decided to prioritize the embers of friendship that I was trying to stir and get my package out as soon as I could, rather than prioritize this video. And so I asked my partner to finish sealing up the package for me and take it to the post office. I did also, at that stage, think that I had a little bit of footage, not what I had been hoping to get, but a little bit of footage of laying the hats out on my bed just to, finish them up and take pictures for Ravelry. But when I went back to look at that footage, I realized that I had not, in fact, taken any video because I was too shaky that day. So I had settled for just pictures, and I'm afraid that is all I have to share with you. I have honestly been pretty frustrated with this. Frustrated with my body and the limitations it places on me, the circumstances I find myself in, and sometimes frustrated too with the applause that the people in my life, wonderful people that they are, heap on me when I air these frustrations, and how they encourage me to focus on what I can and have done instead of what I still cannot do. Of course, in cases like these, both perspectives are right. It is frustrating that my body is allowed to dictate so many of the terms of my making and my life, but I am also proud of what I've done. And I can see, especially when I look at a life like Dickinson's, how the things that she couldn't do, or the things that she had to do much more slowly, much more occasionally than other people, taking weeks or months or maybe even years to finish a stocking, those things pale in comparison. They matter so much less than who she was to the people around her, and how she was able to share herself, her friendship and her affection and her love through gifts and poems, sharing with the people in her life, but also, fortunately, with us. And in lots of ways, I can recognize that this project has been a huge success. To my mind, Emerson was on the right track when he said that gifts should be made of our talents, though we may want to interpret talents slightly more broadly than Emerson did in his 1844 essay. But I think that Dickinson, in the way that she lived that practice, in absolutely every aspect of her life, is an even better authority on the kinds of creativity we share with others. You don't write nearly 1,800 individual poems unless you love it, and you don't gift your poems or your favorite plant clippings or your knitting to friends unless you love them too. And what a gift it is to have friends to give things to who understand that.